And welcome back. Let's continue with that story now about ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa accepting nomination to stand for a second term at the helm of the party. Professor Dirk Kotze is a political analyst. He joins us now for more on this. Professor Kotze, very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us now. We heard the numbers read out. President Ramaphosa coming in at almost twice the number of his contender. But was he ever going to not run for the position, given that there's already been quite a few pundits who are already saying that President Ramaphosa looks set to retain his position as leader of the ANC for the second term?
Yes, if we look at the number of nominations, then he's in a very strong position. There's going to be just over 4,000 delegates in total, 4,200. This in total, the number of nominations are relatively close to that. So it means that it's a very small number of branches who voted for or nominated someone else. So to some extent, to a large extent actually, this can be an indication already of the trend of what the elections ultimately will most possibly be. And if that is the case, then certainly President Ramaphosa is in a very, very strong position. I think it is to some extent a reflection on the fact that Dr. Zweli Mkhize really started at a very late stage with his campaigning, while President Ramaphosa's campaign started much earlier, early in the year actually. And I think this makes, despite the fact that President Ramaphosa is obviously the sitting president, and that in itself gives him already an advantage.
And I actually, that was going to be my next question. There is this view that leaders seeking re-election for such positions often exploit access to government resources to boost their campaigns, creating an uneven playing field that gives them the advantage over their political opponents. Do you agree that this is a rule of thumb? And you are saying the fact that Zweli Mkhize began his campaign late, does that mean you think that had he started earlier that he would have garnered more votes?
Yes, I think first of all, with respect to President Ramaphosa's position, the fact that he is the incumbent president, both ANC as well as national president, gives him an advantage. It actually gives him an advantage to any incumbent president in South Africa and other parts of the world also. So it is in a sense a re-election, and rather than just his first election. If we look at what happened with President Mbeki in 2002 and with President Zuma with his second conference, they actually also did better than with their first elections. And I think it looks like this is going to be the case with President Ramaphosa also. I think if from an ANC point of view, in terms of the campaigning within the ANC, not so much the public campaigning, if any person started at the earlier stage, it would have been beneficial to them. They would have been able to deal with, especially at provincial level with the ANC, make themselves more known as a candidate. And I think if we look at the campaigns of all the persons who are not on the Ramaphosa side, who's critical of him, their campaigns were actually very much uncoordinated. And I think to a large extent we see now the fact that they to a large extent are actually fragmented and did not present a sort of a coherent campaign from the different candidates in the different positions.
Now, many view it as a two-horse race. Do you believe that that is the case, or is there a chance that there would be a wild card contender from the voting floor that could actually upset the table? And I'd want to hear from you how much the Phala debacle has hurt President Cyril Ramaphosa, and in tandem, the digital vibe saga with Zweli Mkhize.
Yeah, first of all, I don't think there's the possibility of a nomination from the floor because that will require that 25% of the delegates must support that. Now, the fact that so many of the branches already presented their nominations for the presidential position means that there is simply not 25% left that can nominate a third candidate. So I would say from a point of view of possibility, it is almost 0% chance for another candidate. I think when it comes to President Ramaphosa's position with respect to Phala and Dr. Zweli Mkhize with respect to digital vibes, I think in neither case ultimately did it affect them directly. If we look at the number of nominations for President Ramaphosa, it's very high. It's close to 70% of the total. So if Phala had a serious impact on his campaign, then we would have seen that he would have had much less nominations than what he actually received. I think that the Phala's case has more of a public effect and not so much an effect within the ANC. The same, I would say, applies for digital vibes and how it affects Dr. Zweli Mkhize. The fact that he has been nominated primarily by KwaZulu-Natal, and it seems like a number of individual branches in other provinces, I think is the main limitation on his campaign, is the fact that, as I said, he possibly did not cultivate his campaign enough in order to get more support. But it is not necessarily because of the digital vibes situation, but rather because I think of a lack of systematic and comprehensive campaigning from his side. And that is possibly, if there is maybe an impact of digital vibes, it is the uncertainty it created, whether he will have to step aside if he is charged in court, or whether he could have continued, as happened now, to be able to stand as a candidate.
And there's then the issue of a running mate. Do you share the view that Paul Mashatile is likely to replace David Mabuza as deputy leader, as opposed to Justice Minister Ronald Lamola and even Oscar Mabuyane, whose name has also been thrown into the hat? And how much does who has a strong chance of winning, just in terms of the presidential election, impact on who is likely to win as deputy leader?
I think that is less likely. First of all, there is not a clear alignment between the presidential candidates and the deputy presidential candidates. For example, Paul Mashatile is not openly in favor of either of the two. He has his own positions, and some might even argue that he constitutes a third position within the top structure of the ANC. So I think compared to previous national conferences, where there was obviously the notion of slates, there the notion of presidential candidates with deputy presidents who were aligned to them was obviously very clear. In this situation, and this is, I would say, now the first national conference since 2007, that we don't have this situation of where there's a combination of a presidential and deputy presidential candidates who are almost campaigning together for these positions.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and insights. Much appreciated. Political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze.